The Trump administration is denying that it violated a judge's order to stop the deportation of hundreds of migrants over the weekend. President Trump on Friday signed an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which allows the government to deport certain nationals in times of war without trial. The administration used the act to deport nearly 300 people that it alleges are members of a Venezuelan gang, flying them to El Salvador on Saturday. Now, before the flights, advocacy groups filed a lawsuit against the administration on behalf of 5 men who were targeted in the deportation. Late Saturday, a federal judge blocked the president's use of the Alien Enemies Act, ordering any planes with people being deported under the president's executive order to be returned to the United States, even if it meant turning the planes around. The big issue here is the timing of the flights. Administration officials have not said when the deportation flights landed in El Salvador, but the White House press secretary claimed yesterday that the migrants had already been removed from U.S. territory at the time of the judge's order. As the New York Times points out, the judge issued his order shortly before 7 p.m. in Washington. But video posted on social media by the president of El Salvador shows the deportees disembarking the plane at night, and El Salvador is 2 hours behind Washington time. Let's bring in NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley and former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Ehrenberg. Julia, first of all, these deportees, what is the status of the claims or the alleged claim that they are members of the gang? Are they all members of a gang? Do we know that?
That's the thing, Mika. We have to take the White House at its word when they talk about these nearly 300 men that they allege are part of this Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, or TDA. TDA is a gang that began in Venezuela over a decade ago, and it's really been making its way internationally. It's become a recent threat in the United States just in the past year, still much smaller than anything like MS-13. They have been blamed for murders and for robberies in New York City, but really it's been a major focus of this administration to try to focus on this gang in particular. They've also labeled them a foreign terrorist organization, which is one of the reasons why Caroline Leavitt called them all terrorists. But look, without due process, without them going before an immigration judge, without the White House telling us what crimes these people may have committed or whether or not their tattoos merely linked them to this gang, it's really hard to know. I'll even point out during the Biden administration, they had a list of over 600 people they said may have connections to Tren de Aragua, but they said some of these people may have simply been victims who had to pay this gang or get a tattoo in order to survive. It was really difficult to see who exactly in that group would have been a high-level crime member. And that's exactly why the plaintiff's attorneys filed that lawsuit on Saturday to stop the deportations before these people could get due process. Because under that Alien Enemies Act, Trump could use wartime powers that have not been invoked outside of the War of 1812, World War I, or World War II, to summarily deport people merely based on their nationality, and in this case, the fact that they're tied to Tren de Aragua. And once they get into the hands of El Salvador, Mika, they're out of the power of the United States, and that includes out of the power of this judge. So this is a case where if they defied this court order, and at the time, I listened to this Saturday night emergency hearing, a lawyer for the Justice Department told Judge Boasberg that he understood the order and would direct agencies to act accordingly. And that meant even turning around planes mid-air. Instead, we understand those planes landed and they got off and they were handed over to the El Salvadorian government, something the president of El Salvador has tweeted about and said, oopsies, too late, when he saw the headlines about the judge's order. So this is a real mocking of this order that can't be undone. It's unlike another order where if they aren't in compliance, something can be undone. They are now in the hands of the El Salvadorian government, going to these super high security prisons that have been developed by the El Salvadorian government in order to hold people from from gangs in places where they have multiple men sleeping on concrete slabs without so much as a mattress or a sheet. These are very high security, intense conditions that would not pass muster in the United States.
NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for your reporting. And Jonathan Lemire, two legal questions are screaming at me right now. And that the first one is due process, which Julia was talking about. We have no idea what, if any, was had. And the second is the appearance of running over a judge's order.
Yeah, this is a very significant moment here. Due process, let's start there. We have no idea who these people are. We have no idea what crime they've been accused of committing. We have no idea if they're the right people. We've already heard from a number of groups over the weekend, immigration advocacy groups and the like, saying, look, some of the people who've been swept up in this have committed no wrongdoing. They have tattoos for entirely different reasons. They have no associations with this gang whatsoever. The president of El Salvador, who was a sort of a Trump acolyte in many ways, happy to play along. Julia mentioned the taunting tweet. Also, let's note here the highly choreographed video that was shot when these prisoners arrived there in El Salvador at this brutal prison with remarkable production values. It looked like a Hollywood trailer in terms of how much went into this. This was clearly carefully planned and meant to be a show of force. It was meant to be an open message in terms of the Trump, and we're watching some of it here, the Trump immigration policy, but also, Dave Ehrenberg, seemingly an open message at the judiciary. And that's where I wanted to go with you. Please weigh in on the legality of what we're seeing here, but also take a step back. The big picture showdown this seems to be setting up here between this administration, and they're fighting on technicalities. They're fighting on where were the planes? Were they over international waters? Were they in international airspace when the ruling came down? They're fighting on the details of this, but this is clear that they're basically saying we're ignoring a court order. Try to stop us.
Jonathan, I was concerned that this would be the coup that we all worried about. That's when the administration says we are going to disregard court orders. The administration came out and said, no, we're not defying a court order here. The order just came too late, and the plane was in the air, international airspace, so the judge didn't have the authority to get it back. That's not true. This is the administration being a little too cute here. This is the principle of it's always easier to apologize than to ask permission. That's what they're going under here, because their excuse is obviously phony. You don't get to deny and defy a court order because you've taken suspects in international airspace. And the administration rushed to get these folks into the air, and they tried to get them on ground in El Salvador before the court came out with its order, but they didn't do so. The White House did say that they will appeal to the Supreme Court, and that is the proper way to challenge a court order. And another reason why I don't believe it's a coup yet, it's clear, though, that Trump wants a fight on this, because when it comes to alleged Venezuelan gang members like foreign students who sympathize with terrorists, that doesn't have a lot of political appeal. So the Democrats are responding with high-minded constitutional principles of due process and First Amendment, while Trump is saying, well, let's make America safe again. This is the terrain they want to fight on. They'd much rather have this debate than talk about the sinking stock market, the chances of a recession, or rising egg prices.
Yeah, I mean, Dave, you hit it exactly, that the Trump administration is trying to make a point with people they perceive as not particularly sympathetic victims. The student up at Columbia who was saying, siding with Hamas, it seemed, in some issues. And now these, at least some of them, are members of a gang, or there's, who have, accused of doing truly terrible things. But isn't what makes America America? Is it no matter who you are, you're still entitled to free speech and due process, no matter how unsympathetic or unsavory your views might be? Talk to us a little bit about the slippery slope we may be on here.
Well, that's why President Trump is invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which gives the president extraordinary power to do this without going through the immigration courts, without having real due process. The problem is the act says that the president can only do it when the United States is at war with another country, or if the foreign country has invaded or threatened to invade the U.S. That hasn't happened here, and that's why I think the courts are ultimately going to rule against the president. But the question is then, if the president ignores the courts, then how does the court enforce its actions? Because they're under the marshal's office. They have the marshal's office to enforce its rulings, and the marshal's office is under the executive branch. So we could be headed for a constitutional crisis.